Hello. The following video will show you how to deploy Windows 10 using System Center Configuration Manager Current Branch. First, to determine if you are running the current branch of System Center Configuration Manager, or SCCM, open up the SCCM Admin Console, go to the upper left-hand corner, click on the down arrow, and select About Configuration Manager. Here you will see that we're running version 16.06. It is recommended that you're running version 15.11 or higher to have full support for Windows 10. Each version of Configuration Manager has a 12-month support lifecycle before you have to update to the latest release. So for example, with version 15.11 of SCCM Current Branch, you have 12 months of support till November of 2016. The version here, version 16.06, will have support till June of 2017. Configuration Manager is on an approximate 4-month release cycle between each update. Each update will have bug fixes, new features that will support Windows 10. This video will show you how to deploy Windows 10 using SCCM using SCCM version 16.06 of the current branch. Items that we'll cover in this video will include setup and configuration of SCCM for operating system deployment, an overview of the operating system's node under software library, and descriptions about each node underneath and what it does. And then we'll also demonstrate capturing a operating system reference image and deploying that reference image to a new device. Prior to installing SCCM, it is recommended that you have the latest Windows ADK installed on the site server. The pieces from that will be required will include the deployment tools, Windows PE, and the user state migration tool. It's also recommended that you have WSUS installed on either on the site server or on a remote site system, as we'll need the software update point for patching during our task sequence. Also, if you plan on using any PXE from your distribution points during the operating system deployment process, it is also a good idea to install Windows Deployment Services. So now that we have covered a little bit about the servicing model for a configuration manager and how that relates to Windows 10, let's go ahead and get started with the configuration as needed within SCCM in order to start the OSD process. So the first thing that's recommended is that you have your Active Directory schema extended prior to installing SCCM. In most cases, if you have upgraded from Configuration Manager 2012, then the Active Directory schema is probably already been extended. So you also want to make sure that your site server has full control over the systems management container and therefore can publish its information in Active Directory. Once that piece has been completed, then we can start setting up our boundaries for our site. Here you can see that I have a boundary based on an IP address range, but you can also have boundaries based on IP subnets, AD sites, and also on IPv6 address ranges. Once you have your site boundaries defined, site boundaries then go as a part of a boundary group. Boundary groups can be created for site assignment or content lookup. If we review the properties of a boundary group, you can see that in boundary group 1 we have our IP address range as a member of this boundary group. This boundary group is also used to determine site assignment, so any clients or devices that fall within this IP address range will be assigned to the PR1 site. We also have two site system servers, CM01 and CM02, which are also associated with this specific boundary group. It's important that site systems are assigned to this specific boundary group because they will use the clients in this IP address range that we have as part of this boundary define will use these site systems for policy and then also for content lookup. And also, if they're doing scenarios where we're migrating user state data, then we'll use this boundary for the location of the state migration point. You can also notice that based on the link speed, we can change it to either be a fast or a slow link, depending on what our WAN connection speed to this particular site or subnet would be. Also, before we get our operating system deployment, we want to make sure that we have the following site roles functioning and properly configured in order for our OSD operating system deployment, our OSD, to be successful. First is our distribution points. The number of distribution points in the site is going to be specific on the number of locations and on the number of devices that you're planning on upgrading to Windows 10. When you size your distribution points, make sure that you have adequate disk space and networking capacity, as these are going to be typically the areas of bottlenecks during the imaging process. And also, if you plan on using PXE as a mechanism for accessing the config manager infrastructure, you're also going to need Windows deployment services installed on the distribution point server. And we'll cover that on how to do that in just a moment. You need to also make sure that you have adequate management points. The current limitation is 1 management point for 25,000 devices. It's also recommended that you have the reporting services point installed. We can use the reporting services point to report on our success and failure rate of our OS operating system deployments, and also we can use it for troubleshooting as well. And we'll also want a software update point installed. During when our task sequence runs and we get to the install software update step, we're going to scan for any missing patches, not just for the Windows operating system, but for Office and other applications as well. Some optional components that you'll want as part of your OSD process are the fallback status point. This will help with receiving any communication if we have failures from clients not installing properly. And then we'll also want a state migration point. If we plan on using user state migration tool to back up and restore user data when we're migrating devices, we'll need a place to store the user's data. State migration points are an excellent place for us to hold that data while the user is being migrated to a new device. Some additional setup besides the site roles that need to be configured is also some settings related to the site. If we click on the sites and go to Configure Site Components, Software Distribution, and click on the Network Access Account tab, you'll notice that we need to have a network access account for WinPE to access our distribution point. You can see here in the example that I've created a domain user account called corp/cn_NAA. This account does not have to be a domain administrator, but does need read access to the distribution point, and it's also used by configuration manager clients that are accessing distribution points and from untrusted domains. So this account needs to be configured prior to starting any operating system deployment. Next, I want to talk about the unknown computers collection that is one of the 4 pre-built collections that you'll find in SCCM. Unless we pre-populate the devices inside the Configuration Manager database, this collection will serve as a placeholder for our devices that are not pre-populated. If you'll notice that we have 2 devices, one for x64 devices and one for x86 devices. we'll need to target our task sequences to our all unknown computers collection for devices that we're not going to pre-populate into SCCM. For devices that we are going to pre-populate into SCCM, we can go to the Devices node and click on Import Computer Information. You'll see in the Import Computer Information wizard, we have two options. We can import from a file, or we can import a single computer. If we import from a file, it will ask for a CSV, and then you can assign all the different headers and stuff. If we go back and import a single computer, it's going to ask for a computer name, the MAC address, or the SMBIOS SQUID. We can optionally create a computer association by entering the name of the reference computer. Once we have all our computers in a specific target collection, we can then create a deployment from our task sequence and target Windows 10 to those devices. Next, under Software Library, under the Operating Systems folder, we're going to talk about each one of the nodes and what they're used for and how they play a role in our Windows 10 deployment. The drivers node is where we're going to import all of our drivers for our devices. This would include our video drivers, network, mass storage, Intel chipset drivers, Bluetooth, and basically any driver that powers hardware on the computer. Typically, most of the major OEM vendors will have plugins that you can install on the SCCM console that will assist in driver management. They also have, for most makes and models, will have the drivers prepackaged into CAB files for easy importing. In our example here, if we click on the drivers node, you'll see that two drivers have already been imported into our Configuration Manager site. In this example here, we have a mass storage driver and a network driver. It's important to note that we need to create categories for easy filtering on our drivers. Let's review the properties of each driver. We can right-click on the driver and go to Properties, and you can see very easily that I have this particular driver, which is a storage driver, has been assigned to a storage category. By easily unchecking this box, we can disable a driver and delete it later or re-enable it. You can also see on the Applicability tab that you can enable drivers for specific operating systems. By clicking on the Usage tab, we can see which package that a driver is in, and also if that driver has been added to our boot images. Once we have the necessary drivers imported into SCCM, then we can create driver packages. Basically, creating driver packages is based on preference, but here you can see that I've created a driver package for a Dell E6430 laptop. If we right-click on the driver package node and click Show Members, you'll see the two drivers that I had previously listed under the drivers node that are contained in the drivers package. In this case, we have the mass storage driver and the network driver. All our driver packages need to be on a distribution point prior to the task sequence running, as we'll need these to be as the task sequence will check to make sure all the necessary content is on the distribution point. Under the Operating System Images node, this is where we store any custom REST images that we've captured using SCCM or Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. In this particular example here, I've captured a custom image using SCCM. In this case, we've captured Windows 10 EDU version 1511. Later in this demo, we'll walk through the process of capturing a Windows 10 EDU image using a capture boot media made from a task sequence. It's important to remember that the more stuff that you add to your WIM image, the larger the image will be, and it will be also more difficult to maintain. The best approach is to do a hybrid approach, where in your image you contain your base image with your software updates, operating system, and then several redistributables that might be needed, such as PDF viewers or runtimes for specific applications. It is by no means that you don't have to put other applications, but those applications may be harder to maintain individually and may require more updating. So there are three different types of images that you can create. You can either create a thin image, which would just be your base operating system. You could create a hybrid image, which would contain your operating system, software updates, runtimes, software redistributables, PDF viewers. Or you can create a thick image. The thick image may contain Microsoft Office and other line of business applications. It may also contain all the drivers for all the different makes and models. Under the Operating System Upgrade Packages node, this is the WIM file that contains the Windows Setup original source files. As you can see here, I've imported and set up a package for Windows 10 Education 1511. To import a new source file, we'll right-click and click Add Operating System Upgrade Package. From here, you'll put in a UNC path to where the original Windows Setup source files are located on a network share. Then click Next, and it will create you an operating system upgrade package. We can use this package to upgrade one version of Windows 10 to a new version of Windows 10. Underneath Operating System Upgrade Packages, we have our boot images node. When SCCM is installed, it will create two boot images, one for x64 devices and one for x86 devices. Let's review the properties of a boot image and let you see the customizations that can be done. Here you will see that I've pulled up the boot image properties for our x64 boot image. Under the General tab, we basically have the properties for the boot image. In this particular case, the name and the version number of the boot image. If we click on the Images tab, we can get additional information on when the boot image was created, the language, and the size. By clicking on the Drivers tab, we can see what drivers have been added to the boot image. As a best practice, you want to limit the types of drivers that you put in your boot image. Namely, network drivers and mass storage drivers should be the only drivers that need to be in the image. Under the Customization tab, we can add a pre-start command to let a program run prior to during the startup of our task sequence. An example of this would be an HTA screen, where we might put input data such as computer name, the OU that we want our device to belong to, and other important information. We can also customize the background of our WinPE environment, replacing the Configuration Manager logo with one of our organization. We can also expand out our scratch space for our programs to run. And for testing, we can enable command prompt support so we can access a command prompt so we can do tests like ping, traceroute, etc. By clicking on the Optional Components tab, you can see that we can add additional programs to our WinPE for use with Config Manager. If I click on the yellow star, a list of optional components can be added. So for example, if we need to add PowerShell support to WinPE or have a database, we can check these boxes and these additional components will install in as part of our boot image. For task sequences, we can create several task sequences to deploy Windows 10 to new devices, to upgrade existing Windows 10 devices to a new version of Windows 10, and create the capture and boot media needed to deploy Windows 10. Let's walk through several examples of task sequences and also how to create boot media. As you can see in the example, I already have two task sequences here in my site, one to deploy Windows 10 Education and another one to deploy Windows 10 Education as an upgrade. So to create a task sequence, we'll first right-click on the task sequence node, and we'll select Create Task Sequence. So we're being presented here with a couple of options here to create a new task sequence. We can install an existing image package, meaning that we can take a custom reference image that was captured using SCCM and use this task sequence to deploy that image. We can also use a task sequence to build and capture a reference operating system. This will help automate the build and capture process. We can also install an existing image package to a virtual hard disk. So, for example, we can use this task sequence to deploy our Windows 10 image to a VHD file for use in Hyper-V. We can also upgrade an operating system from an upgrade package using the original Windows setup files that are found under operating system upgrade packages. And we can create a new custom task sequence where we can add the steps that we need in any order that we like. So in our example here, we're going to create a simple install package or a simple task sequence that we can install using an existing image package. So here in the task sequence, I'll pick the one I want and I'll click Next. And we'll give this a name. Then we're going to need to select the appropriate boot image. So by clicking on boot image, we can select the x64 boot image. Click Next. On the Install Windows screen, we can then pick the image package that we want to use. In this case, we're going to use our custom reference image. We'll select Windows 10 EDU 1511, and you can see here in the description this was the custom reference image that's been captured. We'll pick the appropriate index for our image, and we're going to, since we are going to deploy this to a new device, we definitely want to partition and format the target computer before we install the operating system. Now, in our particular example, we're not going to configure BitLocker, but you do have the option to configure BitLocker as part of any task sequence. Under our specifying our licensing information, this will be, you will only need to put your license key in if you're going to be using Mac activation. If you have a key management server, then you don't need to put any kind of information in the product key. We are going to enable and specify a local administrator password, so make sure that you specify and use good password practices when creating this. Click Next. In this field, in the Configure Network step, we're asked if we want to either join this to a work group or join our device to a domain. In this scenario, we're going to be joining us to a domain. So we'll click Join a Domain, click Browse, and select our domain. We also have the option to join this to a specific OU. So in our example here, we want to put our device into our workstation's OU. Then we need to set an account here to join the device to the domain. This account should be a low privileged account and should not be a domain administrator account or use any of the specific groups that are built in to the domain. So make sure this account has the appropriate permissions to join the device to the domain. On the Install Config Manager client screen, you'll see here that it automatically defaults to our Configuration Manager client package. In the installation properties, we can add additional installation properties for our client installation. You can also change the package to your own custom Configuration Manager client package as well. For configuring state migration, this is the settings that we're going to migrate on the destination computer as part of this image deployment. As you can see here, it automatically will capture our user settings and files, and it will use the built-in USMT package that we have that is created when we install Configuration Manager. In this specific example, we're going to be deploying to a new device, so we're not going to be capturing any user settings. So I'm going to uncheck these boxes here for the sake of simplicity. When we install our software updates, we will need to create a software update group that contains the updates we want to install. We will then need to create a deployment that is targeted to the collection that also our task sequence will be targeted to. In our example, we want to install software updates as part of our image installation. So I'm going to select required for installation, mandatory software updates only. We also can add applications to be installed as well. In our example, we want to install the Config Manager 2012 Toolkit into our image. So we will pick this application and we have an application to install. You can also install additional applications as needed. We will click Next. We will confirm all of our settings, click Next again, and look at the progress on our task sequence. We will click Close. If we need to edit our task sequence, we can go and right-click on our task sequence, click Edit, and we can see here that these are the steps that can be modified. In our example, we are going to deploy Windows 10 to a BIOS-enabled machine and not on UEFI. So in this case, we can actually delete the step if we wanted to. So we can right-click and click on Delete, and we can remove the step from the task sequence. We can also disable a step and not delete it. So for example, let's say we did not want to install applications as part of this task sequence. We can click on the step, click on the Options tab, and check on Disable this step. Next, let's say we wanted to add a driver package. So we could come here, we could click on the step where we want to add our next step, click on Add, go to Drivers, and say Apply a driver package. So by clicking on the driver package, if we click Browse, we can select the driver package that we want for our specific device. It's best in most cases that if you are going to be using multiple devices in your organization, that you use a WMI query to filter on the driver package based on make and model. This way, when it evaluates the steps, it will only apply the driver package that is applicable to the make and model. If we review additional steps in our task sequences, we can do other things such as run command lines, PowerShell scripts, restart computers, and do check readiness to ensure that our device meets the requirements for Windows 10. We can also download package content. We can install legacy packages. We have ways to convert our disk to dynamic disk. We can format partition disk, and we can even enable or disable BitLocker. We can also do other things such as apply a data image, prepare the Config Manager client for capture. We can add additional driver packages, or we can auto-apply drivers to an image. This will let the Windows operating system sort out the drivers based on what's available in the SCCM database. We also have MDT extensions which can be added with the installation of the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit on the site server and in running the Config Manager integration. This will give us additional features that we can use in our task sequence. Next, we're going to use the task sequence wizard to create a boot image and a capture image. To create a boot image and a capture image media, we want to click on the Create Task Sequence Media. This will give us the 4 different types of media that can be used to deploy or capture an operating system. First, the standalone media. Standalone media can be used to deploy operating systems without network access. This is useful in scenarios where we have remote workers that may not have access to our SCCM infrastructure. We can also create boot media, which can be used to access our configuration manager infrastructure. Some organizations may not allow for PXE boot from distribution points. Therefore, we'll have to use boot media. This can be placed on a DVD, a CD, or a USB media. We can also use capture media to capture an operating system deployment image from a reference computer. This can be our gold image that we capture and be used to deploy to our new Windows 10 devices. We can also use pre-staged media, which creates a file that can be placed on the hard drive of our new device. Therefore, when we turn on our device for the first time, we already have the boot image, the operating system reference image, and any drivers, therefore reducing the amount of time needed to download the content to the device, and we can reduce the amount of time that it takes for our task sequence to run. In the demo below, we're going to show the process of creating bootable media that can be used to contact the config manager infrastructure, and we'll also create some capture media that can be used to capture our reference image. To create boot media, we'll select the boot media option and click Next. We have the option to use either dynamic media or site-based media. In this case, we're going to select site-based media so that it contacts a specified management point, and we'll click Next. We're going to create this media to be used on a CD-DVD set. So in the media file box, we will give a path to our file that we'll use to our folder where we'll stage our boot media. So in this case, I'll do it to the eDrive temp folder and call this PR1A boot media.iso. If we want this boot media to be able to provide unknown computer support, we need to make sure that option is enabled. We can add additional security by putting password protection on our boot media. So for this demo, we're going to remove the password option. If we're using HTTP for client to server communication, we can create a self-signed certificate. By default, the certificate is good for 1 year. If we're using HTTPS for client to server communication, we will need to import a client certificate from our PKI infrastructure, which has an EKU of client authentication, into our boot media in order for this media to communicate properly with our HTTPS enabled distribution point and management point. We will pick a boot image from one of our boot images that we have available. In this case, we'll use the x64 boot image. We'll pick a distribution point, and we'll pick a management point. We will click Next. On the customization screen, we'll add any specific customizations that we want. For example, if we do want a pre-start command to run to launch an HTA screen, we can add all of our files and command lines at this time. We will review our summary, click Next, and we'll go through the process of creating our boot media that we can use to access the Configuration Manager infrastructure. Once the media has been successfully created, we can then take the ISO and burn it to a CD or DVD set. Next, we'll go through the process of creating capture media. So we'll right-click and select Create Task Sequence Media and select the capture media. Again, we have the options to either put this media on a USB drive, or we can put this on a CD DVD set. So in the media file field, we will put the path. So here I will put e:/temp /PR1A capture media. Now, the name for the media can be anything specific to your organization. It's just what you want the file name to be. We'll click Next. We will pick a boot image. We'll pick a distribution point. We'll click Next. Review our settings. Click Next, and our progress will start to create our capture media. Once the capture media has been successfully created, we can then take this media, either in this case we can burn it to a CD or a DVD set, or if we created USB type media, we can mount it, copy it over to our USB drive, and use this to capture our reference operating system. Once we have created our boot media and our capture media, we can now proceed to the step where we can actually capture our reference image. In this example here, I've installed a fresh copy of Windows 10 Education version 15.11. I've patched it with all the latest updates from Windows Update. I've also added Adobe Reader as an application, and I have removed some items from the default Start menu. This is a good time where you need to sit down and plan what you want in your image. You can also add redistributables and other applications such as Microsoft Office or line of business apps. Again, the more stuff that you add to your reference image, the larger the reference image will be. You should plan on at least capturing your reference image once a quarter, or whatever works best for your organization. There may be times when we release quality updates for Windows 10 that you will want to re-baseline your image. Again, it's all about personal preference and how you maintain your images. When you're ready to start the process of capturing your image, you will insert the media that you copied your capture media to. In this case, I'm just using an ISO mounted to a virtual machine, but you would insert the DVD, the CD, or the USB drive. You can open up File Explorer and it will bring up a menu to launch the Capture Media Wizard. You can then click on Launch Media and wait for the UAC prompt and select Yes. Now that we have our UAC prompt, we'll select Yes. And we should get the image captured wizard starting here momentarily. So we'll click Next. At this point, we'll want to enter the share that we want to upload our reference image to. So in this case, I have a share on my site server called Sources. So we'll enter in the name of our site server and the share. And the name of the image that you want to, what you want to call your capture operating system image. So in this case, we'll call it win10edu.wim. We'll also need an account in order to access the share. If there is an existing image, it'll ask it, do you want to overwrite it? And we'll just say yes for this example. I'll click the version. And we'll click Next. We'll review the output here and click Finish. And then it will start the process of capturing our reference image. And then it will sysprep it, and then it will capture it and upload it to the share. Once the image capture process is complete, you will receive a dialog box that says the image has been successfully uploaded to the share. At this point, we can come over to Operating System Images, click on Add Operating System Image, and put in the UNC path to where your reference image is located. Click Next, and it will create your operating system image. And as you can see here, I have one named Windows 10 EDU, and if we go and pull up the properties of this image, you can see here are all the properties of the image, and if I click on the images, I can get more detailed information. Also, as updates are released for Windows 10, I can use the offline servicing feature within SCCM to inject the cumulative updates to keep my image up to date. So as new devices are purchased, they always have the most up-to-date WIM and they're fully patched. Now we're going to go through the process of deploying our reference image that we just captured in the previous demonstration and deploy it to a new device. As you can see here, I have two task sequences, and the first task sequence is called Deploy Windows 10 EDU. I want to click on Edit and just review the steps in this task sequence. This is a very basic task sequence, but the steps go as follows. We'll restart the device into Windows PE. We're going to partition the disk, and as you can see here, it will create a couple of partitions for me on the disk. It will apply the operating system. So we'll apply an operating system image to our reference image here, Windows 10 EDU 1511 English. Or we can do an operating system from our original source installation from the operating system upgrade package. We're going to select the location where we want to apply the operating system. As you can see here, we have all our username information, product key, password for our local admin account, and time zone. We have network settings, and in this example, we have our domain OU and account to join the domain. And we're also going to apply device drivers here. So we'll have the task sequence pull the drivers and install those that best match the type of hardware we're deploying to. We'll set up our configuration manager client. We'll install software updates, and then we will deploy and install the Config Manager toolkit. We will then create a deployment that will be targeted to the All Unknown Computers collection. If I click on the Deployments tab, you will see that I've already created a deployment and made it available. In this case, we can just select it at any time, and there's not a deadline. But if I wanted to make another deployment, I would just right-click on the task sequence and click Deploy. As you can see here in this particular collection, I have an option to choose collections. So in this particular case, I'm going to redeploy again to another collection here. I can make the task sequence either available or required. You also have options here to make the task sequence available only to Configuration Manager clients, or if you want it only available to Media or Pixie, or all three, or you can also hide the task sequence as well. If I'm making it mandatory, I can schedule a time. I can customize the user experience. I can set alerts. And I can also specify how the content is downloaded from the distribution points. I can click Next, and you will see the progress when the task sequence has been completed. Deployment wizard has been completed. Next, we will start the process of actually deploying the device. In this particular scenario, we're booting off the boot media that we created earlier in this exercise. As you can see here, we're now booting into the Windows PE environment. At this point, if we had clicked Next, we would have been prompted to enter, if we had had the password for security enabled, we would have been prompted to enter a password to move forward. But in this case, we disabled it, so we'll just click Next. The boot media will look for a task sequence that's deployed to the collection. As you can see here, we have our Deploy Windows 10 EDU task sequence. We'll click Next. And I've set up a collection variable on my All Unknown Computers collection to add a computer name. I can come in here and double click on OSD computer name and add a computer name for this computer. Once I click Next, it will resolve all the task sequence dependencies and run through the process of partitioning the disk and starting the process of deploying our Windows 10 image. Now that we have completed the task sequence, we can log into our new Windows 10 device. And in this case, we're running this in a virtual machine. But we can do some quick checks to see if our task sequence was successful. One is we can go and launch system here. And as you can see, we put in CLT WKST-8 and it's joined to the domain. And if we bring up the control panel and go to Programs and Features, you can see that our application Config Manager 2012 Toolkit R2 installed. And we can also go up to our control, further up into the control panel, go to our Config Manager icon. And we can see here that our Configuration Manager client installed properly. It's assigned to the PR1 site. We have the 5.0084121006. That is the version of the 1606 client. And if we click on the Actions tab, our client is fully provisioned and ready to go. So now we have a domain joined Windows 10 Education managed by SCCM. Now, if we also go back to the Configuration Manager console and click on our All Desktops and Server Clients collection, you can see that the workstation is online and that it has also reported up a policy request, a heartbeat DDR, and it's done its initial hardware scan. And we can also see additional details as well. So, In this video, we have demonstrated the configuration that's needed for operating system deployment. We have reviewed the task sequences, reviewed how to create boot media and captured media. We have captured a reference image, and then we have deployed that reference image using SECM. Thank you for your time.